at free fall speed into its own base, its own footprint, on its own foundation, all in a neat pile.
It turns out that a further investigation of that building turns out 25% of the depth of the building was gone. Popular Mechanics did the story on this. A fifth-floor fire was burning up for 7 hours. Debris from the North Tower was all over the place. And the construction of the building, because of the weight of the columns, that's what caused it to come down, not some kind of crazy government theory to further hurt the American people.
It's a classic controlled demolition. You see streamers of smoke. You see the thing collapse in the middle first. It's classic controlled demolition.
9/11, 9/11, what went down with Building 7? It's a mystery to this day. The building fell with such precision, free fall speed, no reasons given.
I saw people down there when we got down there, when number 7 came down, they say about the building number 7 coming down the same way. Yeah, because so much heaviness came off from the World Trade Center coming down onto 7. 7 came down. The foundation was all out of whack because of them coming down. There could have been more buildings coming down around. Why it happened that way? Only architects and only
we went over it with the Popular Mechanics, people who have done an exhaustive study. But
Popular Mechanics.
Popular Mechanics.
This is a photo taken 1 second into Building 7's collapse. Notice the crimp. If we look at other controlled demolitions, we see that they first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. If you don't do this, the building falls outward and has a wider collapse radius and can damage surrounding structures. This was not the case with Building 7. Building 7 had a classic crimp or wedge. Its central column was blown out first.
Building 7, while I was listening to live feed from our local public radio station later in the afternoon, they talked about Building 7. Building 7 was fine. There was no airplane that hit it. And then they even began to ruminate on the air about demolishing the building. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, you can put out fires. You know, why would you talk about demolishing a building that, you know, it wasn't hit by anything? You know, the fires weren't bad or anything like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, a King 4 News special emergency bulletin. Apparently, someone has uncovered video footage of the BBC archives. This newly released footage clearly shows a reporter from the BBC reporting the collapse of World Trade Center 7 30 minutes before it actually did. Just to let you know, the World Trade Center 7 was also known as the Salomon Brothers building.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, much earlier today.
What was in Building 7? Well, the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, FEMA, U.S. Secret Service, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the city's main command bunker, overseeing the entire operation. That's what was in Building 7, a structure that was over-engineered, that could stand thousands and thousands and thousands of degrees of temperature for days if need be. But it collapsed in just a few seconds.
Hi, I'm a 9/11 victim. I met you in October 2020. Sabrina? You came for Lieutenant Robert F. Wallace.
Of course.
I have a question for you. You reported to Peter Jennings that on 9/11 the World Trade, the towers were going to collapse, and excuse me, no steel structure in history has ever collapsed due to a fire. How come people in the buildings weren't notified? And who else knew about this? And how do you sleep at night?
Ma'am, I didn't know that the towers were going to collapse.
He reported it to Peter Jennings.
No.
You said Peter
Jennings on ABC
and
video, you indeed said that the towers, you were notified the towers were going to collapse while you were in some, not sure exactly where you were prior to, but you said it on ABC video with Peter Jennings in an interview that you were aware that towers were going to collapse in advance. We'd like to know who told you the towers were going to collapse in advance, sir, and also we'd like to know who else you told.
Well, the fact is that I didn't realize the towers would collapse. I never realized that.
I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management, and we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
Our understanding was that over a long period of time, the way other buildings collapsed, the towers could collapse, meaning over a 7, 8, 9, 10-hour period. No one that I knew of had any idea that they would implode. That was a complete surprise. Thank you.
Thank you all. Do you have any comments about World Trade Center members? You threw the family members in the garbage. You threw the family members in the garbage, sir.
The command center for Rudolph Giuliani was in this building. Rudolph Giuliani had his command bunker in this structure, and so did the CIA. It wasn't just the city of New York. The CIA, the FBI were all based in this building. And Rudolph Giuliani told ABC News that he got a call that morning about 8 hours before this collapse, before a fire even started, and was told, get out of Building 7. And he left to a FEMA command base that had already been set up the night before, which he's now admitted in congressional testimony, right down the street by the harbor. A lot of interesting timing. Then you have the firefighters telling Associated Press reporters to get back, to get away from the building, that Building 7 was about to come down. And then it magically did come down.
I smell government crime. Next time a politician comes to your town, ask him about World Trade Center 7 and watch him squirm to think of a lie.
Also, a question I have for you. World Trade Center 7 was brought down on September 11th at 5:20 in the evening. The leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, Larry Silverstein, gave a public interview on PBS in 2002, and he said that they pulled that building, which is a demolition term for intentionally bringing down a building. This man made over $5 billion from those buildings' destruction, and I want to know if there was ever a formal investigation into Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, and his ties to this entire event.
I don't believe there's been a formal investigation. I haven't heard that. I don't know that. I do know that that wall, I remember, was in danger, and I think that they made a decision based on the danger that it had of destroying other things, that they did it in a controlled fashion. I don't believe there's been a formal investigation. I haven't heard that. I don't know that. I do know that that wall, I remember, was in danger, and I think that they made a decision based on the danger that it had of destroying other things, that they did it in a controlled fashion.
Now, let's be real clear here. He's being asked about Building 7, and he says, I heard it was brought down in a controlled fashion because of the wall, to protect the wall. Okay? Now, you could do mental gymnastics and say he might have been talking about Papa Smurf. He might have been talking about the Blue Bunny, too. But he's being asked about Building 7. See, that's how propaganda works. Just convince enough people, well, maybe he's not. Maybe we should back off that. Or maybe it is a blue screen behind them on BBC, and maybe the 7 had already fallen and they just got the tape wrong. BBC says, no, it was up a window and we were wrong. No, you're not wrong, BBC. It's a blue screen. And no, Silverstein's not really saying that. And no, those really aren't blast squibs coming out. And no, nor